Welcome to the SMB Community Podcast with hosts Amy Babinchek, James Kernan, and Karl Polachek. Produced by Kernan Consulting and for the international MSP community. We are dedicated to making every IT professional a successful IT professional.
Hi, this is Karl. Welcome to another SMB Community Podcast. I am joined today by Jamie Levy, who is the Director of Adversary Tactics at Huntress. Jamie is also a longtime researcher, developer, and board member of the Volatility Foundation. Remind me to get back to that. She has worked for over 15 years in the digital forensics industry, conducting investigations as well as building out software solutions. Jamie is also a co-author of The Art of Memory Forensics, the first book of its kind covering various facets of how to investigate RAM artifacts. Our primary topic today is the Huntress 2024 Threat Report, and we will have a link in the show notes. So, Jamie, welcome to the SMB Community Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, when I saw that you were the co-author of the first book about investigating RAM artifacts, I was like, okay, so she's going to be my age, like 65, but you're not. How is it possible that such a book has not existed for 50 years?
Well, so it's interesting, but the actual field of digital forensics hasn't technically been around for that long either. When I first started working in forensics, there really wasn't a lot of formality around it. People often built their own tools. The first major commercial tool was InCase, which was utilized by some other open source tools that were available previously. But a lot of times it was people just writing their own tools or using some other open source available tools. But actually looking at the RAM wasn't even something that was part of the methodology. A lot of times what people would do is they would pull the plug. And that was actually what was given, as far as law enforcement was told, when you get on the scene and there's a computer, just pull the plug and deal with it later. And so a lot of times that evidence wasn't even looked at. It wasn't really even thought that it was something that could be relevant. But when you think about it, everything that's running on the computer is in memory, and everything that it's interacting with is in memory. And so when you pull the plug, you're missing out on all of those artifacts that could actually be relevant to your investigation.
And now, actually, thanks to the insurance company, and I never say that, but thanks to the insurance industry, we no longer pull the plug. We want to freeze things in place, and a lot of people are told, don't just destroy all the evidence before you call the cops, right? But it's hard in small business because A, you're under attack, and B, you got to get back into business. So it's much easier in the world where you can take an entire machine offline and wrap it in plastic until the FBI gets it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends on what your goals are, right? And what your threshold is. But yeah, very good point. When you're a business, you can't often afford to take some of these machines offline. And especially nowadays where you have machines that have terabytes and terabytes of data, and you can have very large, memory samples. Sometimes it doesn't even make sense to collect the entire memory and to look at everything. And that's where EDR technology comes in, where you're looking at process executions and things in the moment. And then you can decide whether or not you want to actually collect that memory and do a deeper dive on it.
Right. And if we're lucky, the world of AI will save us by saying, okay, but I know what normal looks like, so I'm just going to monitor when something unnormal shows up, right? So, all right, so I'm going to go back now. Tell me about the Volatility Foundation.
Yeah, so the Volatility Foundation is the nonprofit that basically is around the volatility framework. Volatility framework is the open source software that I've been a developer on since about 2007, 2008 timeframe. That's actually the software that we utilize in order to do these investigations on the RAM of various machines. As far as the foundation is concerned, we mostly it's for the rights of open source as pertain to that particular project, as well as some other like community type things. Like, for instance, we're about to have a conference in October. I think October 21st is supposed to be the From the Source conference, where we invite speakers who are working in threat intelligence or various forensic industries, and even tool builders, where they can come out and they can discuss the things that they're working on and the cool things that they've seen within the past years or so.
Right. Very cool. So, all right. So the topic today, we'll finally get to the topics. The topic today is Huntress's threat report, which is over 30 pages and is just full of really great information. And just kind of to set the scene, you did a deep dive in 2023, and then you went back and said, okay, let's see if how much those threats have changed and what the kind of the big shifts are in the last year. Can you give us a couple of highlights, and then we'll dig down into some of the details?
Yeah, so this last report actually is kind of a larger effort. So like you said, we did one report before that where it basically looked at a quarter from last year or from the year before, and just kind of looked at some initial trends. And this last report, we decided to basically look at all the different type of technologies that we have data for, and to see whether or not we could find any interesting stories that were occurring there. And there were some very interesting things that we saw kind of around ransomware actors, and just kind of like what are the major threats that are involving various customers of ours, as well as different customers of different types. So like we actually looked at some of our healthcare customers, and we looked at some of our customers that are in industrial and manufacturing type customers, just to see like, is there any difference between the threats that are inflicted upon them versus like everybody else that we have.
Right. So how much is new, right? Because I know the biggest news that we talked a little bit about before we pushed the record button was the Quackbot takedown. But Quackbot and Lockbit are still out there, right?
Yeah, so I mean, with all of these takedowns that occur, they will put a dent in the attacker's infrastructure, but there's such a motivation for them to keep doing these things, and it also creates a void for other attackers to kind of move into and take advantage of the situation. And so, like we saw with the Cackbot takedown, it didn't totally knock them out. The takedown itself happened in August of last year, and we did see quite a decrease in activity for September following that, but it never completely went away, and it started to come back again within October. The thing that was interesting, though, is so Cackbot itself is not a ransomware. It's like an initial access malware that often will lead to ransomware at some point. What we decided to do was to look at other types of initial access malware, and also the different ransomware families that we saw, to see if there was any changes in activities across those different threat actors. And we noticed that there definitely was. There was almost like an inverse, if you look at the graph that we have, where you see Cackbot trending down, you start to see increases of Emotet. It's almost like a mirrored image. And Emotet is another one of those initial access malware families. So basically, they were taking advantage and kind of moving in. You also start to see increases in other types of ransomware that we hadn't seen previously, such as Darkgate and Hive and Ink, and you start to see kind of these increases And they're basically moving into that void also, like as some of these other ransomwares that were normally deployed by people who were using CACBot were kind of taken out. And so it's just interesting just to see like what is actually happening with the threat actors. And then it also adds a question of like, how effective are these takedowns? Not necessarily saying that we shouldn't have them, but maybe we should start to deploy some other strategies to help dissuade these threat actors from doing this type of activity in the first place.
Well, so that's a great question, because I was going to say, I think that the takedowns sound like good news and a step in the right direction and all that, but is there something more effective? Like, I mean, should we just use those resources to say, okay, how can we stop the funding, or how can we, because a lot of this is literally funded inside of Russia and North Korea, like places where we are not supposed to be, right? So
Yeah.
we're kind of, I don't know, our hands are tied at some level in the real world, not just in the computer world.
Yeah, it's very difficult. I don't necessarily have a solution, obviously. I mean, if I had one, I would probably be much richer than I am now. But but the basics are, yes, these are motivated attackers. These are business units. They do tend to bring other people in affiliate programs. There's a motivation there, right? And so it's not something that's going to necessarily go away. It's kind of like if you think about like competing entities like Walmart and Target. Like if Walmart gets taken out, Target's going to maybe move in and start to take over that void that was left there. um, I think maybe one way to think about it also could be thinking about like how predators work out in the wild, right? So these are predators that we're dealing with, and think about coyotes and bobcats and things like that, and how they tend to have their territories that they operate within. So like if you have a farm, for instance, they're kind of along the boundaries and usually have livestock guardian dogs or something like that to kind of keep them outside of that boundary. And these predators tend to figure out like where they can operate within, but they also keep other predators out of those boundaries, right? Because they're territorial about the things that they can control. But if you take out those bobcats or coyotes that are right along your boundaries, other items will move in. Other bobcats and coyotes and other type predators will start to take advantage. And they don't necessarily know what the rules are that you've agreed upon. And so then you have this learning period again. So I'm not sure, but like we might be able to kind of borrow something from these theories in nature and how predators actually work out in the wild and maybe employ that here.
So you have to deal with on one hand, like I get the sense you dream in zeros and ones, right? So you're at the RAM level, but at the same time, director of adversary tactics, you have to be very strategic about like trying to think like the bad guys, like what would they do? Like what are they going to go after next? Where are they spending their money? Do you ever consider things like do they have budget constraints? They're run like a business. So we sort of think of it like they have unlimited money because you do a million takedowns or you ransomware a million businesses for $1 million each. Pretty soon it adds up to real money. You can spend it like nothing, but that's not true either, right? So what kinds of things do you look at with adversary tactics?
Yeah, so a lot of times we're doing research into what are the attackers actually doing. So within Huntress, we do have a lot of visibility into what attackers are doing, at least on the small business side, right? The smaller and mid-sized businesses. And so anytime that there's a ransomware event, this is one of our initiatives, is that we're looking to see what happened within the time frame of that ransomware, like what happened before that. And we're looking for any types of patterns. We're looking for ways that we can actually hobble these ransomware actors to help prevent this across our customer base within the future, because we really hate ransomware. And so this is one of the things that we're really just like out to get at this moment. But yeah, definitely it helps to know what are they actually doing, because you can hypothesize about what attackers do all the time. Like you see um, various red teamers, for instance, and they're saying that they do things like the attackers. But a lot of times when you look at a pen test versus what an attacker is actually doing, they don't really look the same. And so it does help to actually look at real attacks and see what are these attackers actually doing and try to get around that.
Do these attackers have, like, I don't know, test networks where they try things, or do they test it all out in the real world where you may be able to monitor them?
I would say probably both. I mean, I'm sure that they have some kind of a lab or something in like their initial stages, but the smaller businesses are a test bed. I mean, all the time that I've done incident response, like I've done a lot of incident response over the years. This is mostly my background before I came here to Huntress. You would see testing. You see where the attackers are initially testing to see whether or not their malware is going to work on a machine. You'll see, like, for instance, when APT1 was very big, like back in the early 2010 or whatever, or even before that, and you would see testing for their bots where basically they would reach out to a machine and you would see the 404, like where the executable wasn't there in the logs that they're trying to reach out to as they're just testing it, and then they would put something there and then they would reach out again and you would see them pull it down and you see this 200 code that this was successful. And then you would start to see a wave of things as things got infected after they had this thing working. And that was just by looking at logs and the file system timestamps, et cetera, and just like figuring out like what are they doing, and just building this big timeline of the activity. So you do see testing, and even on this side, like we see testing, we see like new variants of ransomware that we haven't seen before, and they're trying to see like, is this going to work? Is it going to make it past Windows Defender? Or you see them trying to figure out other ways to disable the antivirus and or the security software. And you see sometimes where they're failing, and then you see like where they failed several times and then they finally succeed. And then you'll start to see them doing this, whatever they did in the success steps, more often and more quickly. So yeah, you definitely do see testing on this side.
Well, so what's interesting about that in the small business world, let's say I've only got whatever, 30 clients. I cannot spend an hour at each of them reviewing their logs and just
Mhm.
kind of like seeing, because I gotta know, what's normal before I know what's abnormal, right? It might be
Mhm.
normal for me to have 1,404 errors in a day, or it might be normal to have 10,000, but I don't know that until I get used to reading those logs. But I literally am overwhelmed trying to do that with just a handful of clients, let alone having 100 clients, 1,000 clients, 10,000 endpoints. And
Yeah.
so without going into a commercial, what does Huntress do to help me get my arms around that so I don't have to spend all my time staring at a screen full of stuff that mostly looks exactly the same because it's not what I do for a living?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We definitely we have a lot of researchers on our side who have a lot of experience doing incident response or detection engineering or something that's related to that, or even doing kind of this red teaming type stuff. Um, and so they kind of know what's normal or like what's not normal, or what are the things that we should look at. And we do, as we write detections for things where we think that this might be a good detection for attacker activity, we will have a bit of testing on our side too. So we'll do some initial runs to see like how often do we see this across our customers. If we see it like millions of times, then that's probably not a good detection. If we see it a handful of times, then yeah, that's probably a little more solid, right? And so just kind of figuring out like what's that sweet spot in that moment. and then we might kind of let it test for like a week or two just to make sure that it doesn't blow up. And then at some point, we know this is a very solid detection, and then we're able to deploy that. And that way, the SOC doesn't get overrun by a lot of extra data, and they're not sending out a whole lot of tickets out to our customers. Like, so when you know that you get this critical or high, ticket, then you better take it seriously, because this is something that has gone through a lot of testing, a lot of knowledge, et cetera. So we know that this is most likely a very critical event, and you should pay attention to it.
Right. So you're not crying wolf all the time.
Correct.
So one of the things that happens, the media report on things like, oh, there's this break-in. Well, they don't report on the break-in on the local attorney that's got 12 employees. They right. They report on, Target and these huge companies. And those huge companies, at the end of the quarter, they report, oh, yeah, we're going to make a, 0.3% adjustment in our revenue for the quarter. Like, it's nothing. It is literally these massive attacks turn to be nothing in the big picture for those companies. But in a small company, one ransomware attack that takes you down for 3 weeks, you're literally out of business. So
yeah,
how do we approach small businesses so that they aren't overwhelmed, they don't see us crying wolf all the time, and yet they take it seriously?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's the thing, is trying to get people to understand that this is serious. And so with the way that our reports are structured, it's very apparent if you're looking at the reports, or if you have your PSA set up correctly to end up wherever it's supposed to go, this is something that you should pay attention to. Now, this is not saying that some customers might not pay attention to things, because I've definitely seen cases where it's like, oh, well, we just now saw this report. I'm driving somewhere and I just now saw it, and it's been like a couple of days or whatever. And it's like, well, that's on you, unfortunately. But yeah, that's probably where the education part comes in. I mean, obviously, a hard lesson would be if it was a ransomware event, but I think our sales representatives do pretty well about engaging customers in those cases and bringing it to their attention, calling them and telling them, hey, you might want to do something about this. So we have our report that goes out. We have the remediations that can be automatically done. If these things are not actioned, usually the SOC or somebody is reaching out to the salesperson and saying, hey, I think you need to prod this customer because this thing is not getting fixed. And then there's a discussion. And there's only so much you can do, though. If it's gone through all that process and the customer still doesn't want to do something about it, there's unfortunately not much we can do.
Right. And there's different attack vectors. Are they dramatically different between big business and small business? Like, remote monitoring attacks versus cloud, injecting something into the cloud storage, or credential attacks. What's a bigger threat in small business, or is it all the same?
So small business obviously is plagued by all the same things that the larger businesses are plagued by, but I think a lot of times they have even more egregious issues, like RDP is open to the internet and it's not secured or whatever. Like there a lot of times some of the smaller businesses are just this low hanging fruit. They're just very easy to knock over. And they don't necessarily have the resources to protect themselves in the ways that larger businesses have.
Right. Well, and that's why they hire an MSP.
Yeah.
Who should be doing this for them. So that's good. So it's mostly the same, which means that we don't have to have a different message from the big guys. We just have to tell them, like, you got one hit. You don't have 3 or 4 or 10 attempts. You have one opportunity to keep these guys out, and it's every single day, every single minute. So you got to spend the money. So we're going to go ahead and put the link in the show notes at huntress.com. What's your favorite part of this report for the 2024 threat report?
I mean, honestly, the thing that I thought was the most fascinating was about the CACBot takedown. But I do like the insights that we're getting into the things like healthcare and just comparing it to the manufacturing industrial customers because the threats are somewhat different. And in healthcare, it seemed to be even like a lower hanging fruit than some of the other types of customers that we have. Um, there wasn't as much diversity in the ransomware that we saw on the healthcare as far as the big players were, but we had a lot of like miscellaneous ransomware. Some you could see where there's like newer actors, there's newer types of ransomware that we haven't seen before. There's just people starting to try to like get into that and make an impact on the, make a quick score of money.
Right.
And healthcare in particular is like very vulnerable because there's these actual life and death scenarios, and people tend to feel like they're going to get some big payout because they think there's some big money over there. And the customers that we have on healthcare, though, are not like the big, like United Healthcare or whatever. Like they're not these big corporations. They're little, dentist offices and pediatrics, et cetera. And they don't have a whole lot of money that they're going to be able to just like throw at this problem. And but we also have other like cancer centers and other things like that where it's terrible. It's egregious. Like if you're going after these particular entities, but
Oh,
the payout is perceived as something easy money, basically.
well, and there's also a lot of nonprofit healthcare. We
Mhm.
used to have a client that ran, mental health services for the county, and they were nonprofit and they were HIPAA and all that kind of stuff, but there was no money to be had, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, what's happened with AI? Because, a year ago we were all like, "Oh my God, AI is going to be like, that's it. It's all over. There, the
Mhm.
bad guys are going to win." But it hasn't seemed to have taken over the universe for ransomware or other attacks.
Well, we haven't seen anything yet, which is good. And I mean, the AI stuff is still kind of ramping up. There's still some issues. Like there's things like things where AI doesn't
Oh,
work
the
correctly.
hallucinations?
Yeah,
Yeah.
hallucinations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. But yeah, there's things like that still happen. I would, I mean, I know that attackers are using AI to basically help build out their scripts and things more easily. Defenders are also using AI, which is good. And in all honesty, like I see it as a pretty good tool for people to use. Obviously, we would hope that you wouldn't do this for nefarious reasons, but they're obviously going to do that.
Right.
It has been fairly quiet as far as like big incidents from attackers. Like there haven't been, like last year was pretty rough as far as like all the different attacks and things that we saw. This year, like at least the last few months, like it's been fairly quiet for the most part, which makes me wonder if there isn't something kind of in the works.
So you
And
want
so
to
that's
relax.
actually what
On the other hand, like you're wide awake, trying to figure out what's next. Well, so the interesting thing for me anyway with AI is that I think the analytical AI, the stuff like if you think about the analogy to healthcare, like we can find these cancers that no human being can find because we just take enough data that the smallest little thing can be picked on and said, oh, you know what? It turns out that weird thing that seems unrelated is the indicator
Mhm.
for this. We
Yeah,
may
finding
be,
the outliers. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I don't want you to give away any secrets of what you're up to, but it seems to me that that's a great tool for
Mhm.
analyzing the behavior of attackers when it comes to the world of ransomware and other malware type threats.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, you can you should think about like all the data that you have. Like there has to be a smarter way to kind of cut through it and figure out like what is actually the bad thing that you're looking for. And that's a totally valid way to just kind of cut through the noise. A while ago, I had written a library that would allow you to do this like from the memory forensics side, where it would allow you to basically take a lot of data and just kind of slice and dice it using set theory to figure out like what are the outliers, what are the things that we're interested in, right? Or what are the things that are common amongst machines and what are the things that are not, right? And so yeah, you're gonna have to get smarter if you want to deal with a lot of data and figure out like what is normal. And the problem, at least from looking at customers on our side and from MSPs when you're looking at all your customers, is that every customer group is different and they might even be different amongst themselves because you have somebody has one laptop from Walmart, another one from here and whatever, and so like even the machines themselves are not the same, and so it's hard to get that nice baseline. And so you have to get even smarter about like figuring out like what's normal amongst those particular customers. And sometimes you have to have informed information from the customer, like, is this RMM what we're expecting in your environment, right? Like you have to have like something where they're actually acknowledging that this is the thing that's considered normal in their environment.
Well, one of the good things that's happened in the last 20 years is I think clients, end user clients, have come to realize that they have to play a role in their own well-being.
Yes.
I think that debate is probably over. All right, one final question, then we're going to wrap up, but you probably don't want to answer this, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So it's fall, we'll be here in a minute, and then we got the fall holidays, and we got Christmas and New Year's and Thanksgiving and so forth. Are you expecting any surprises this year? Is there some particular thing that we all need to look out for? Because, those distracted times when we're all off doing something else seem to be really great times for attackers to take advantage of us.
Yeah, I mean, it's the attackers typically don't take these holidays off, unfortunately. So in my experience, there usually is some kind of uptick in activity around these holidays. I remember the year before the CACbot takedown happened, CACbot was crushing us in around the Thanksgiving timeframe. And it's just indicative, like Thanksgiving, Christmas, like there's always something terrible that's happening. There's some 0-day that's found out or whatever. So yeah, definitely you have to be vigilant, unfortunately. And if it's quiet, then you have to kind of wonder what's really going on. I think that's even a little more unsettling.
So, well, thank you for being on the front lines. And, Adversary Tactics is one of the coolest titles I've ever seen. So, congratulations. I hope you get to keep that business card and, get it shellacked, put it on the wall. So that's a beautiful thing. Great. So we're going to send folks to huntress.com and Jamie Levy from Huntress. If there's anything else you want to say, now's your opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And I just wanted to let everybody know that we're going to have something big for Cybersecurity Awareness Month also in October. We're planning to do the Capture the Flag like we did last year. So I know it was a big deal out in the hacker community and people loved it. And just let you know it's happening again.
Very good. So folks can get connected at huntress.com. And with that, we will be done with yet another SMB Community Podcast. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to the SMB Community Podcast. If you found this useful, interesting, or fun, please subscribe, share with your friends, and give us a thumbs up on your favorite social media. Please check out the show notes at smbcommunitypodcast.com and give us your feedback.